On the subject, Black Lives Matter. This is a slogan that's been highly portrayed during the uprising all across America. And Black lives do matter, but I think there's some things that I want to share that will give more insight into why Black Lives Matter and why we have to come to the reality of the position that we are in and how we get out this position. Prisoners of social economic cycles. As we study the history of African culture in their times, ori, and times of extreme deprivation and oppression, one persistent characteristic stands out. Whether we examine sub-Saharan African culture or North African culture, and that is the prevalence of a traditional value framework which nurtures individual character and personality development and simultaneously gives collective, religious, political, economic, and aesthetic direction. Furthermore, because of the persistence of a traditional value framework, great cultural achievements were made in all fields of learning, and because of those same values, there was always grassroots resistance during times of oppression or colonialism. In South Africa, the Bantu and Zulu tribes resisted the encroachment of the British and Dutch colonialists within a cultural value framework, which was of their own genius. And today their struggle goes on because they have not abandoned their value framework. For instance, the community of Mali, Songhai, and Ghana were great because of a unifying value framework which reinforced the identity of their people throughout their history. Incidentally, this value framework had grown out of the discovery of Islam. When we consider those African people who were enslaved in North America beginning in 1619, we are considering a real Holocaust, a Holocaust unparalleled in the history of humanity. This Holocaust cannot be understood outside of the context of global history during the period between the 15th and 20th century. It was a real Holocaust because it stripped millions of human beings of their ethnic memory, erasing the sense of self-origin, self-purpose, and self-destiny. It is obvious that there exists an attempt to play down the real Holocaust and its effects by focusing on the so-called benefits of life in the United States. This, however, amounts to a gross misinterpretation of living conditions of Africans in America. We are being told that conditions are getting better for us, and to highlight this big lie, news media agencies ignore the real life conditions of most Africans instead of emphasizing the material success of a few comedians, news and sportcasters, athletes, and entertainers. We have a few ratio we have a few radio stations, a handful of mayors, and some local bureaucrats who administer federally funded programs for the minority people. But if we look behind the appearance, which tends to obscure the reality of our condition, we see that what such figures actually represent are co-op Negroes who have failed to articulate the demands of our people, and co-op Negroes who have failed to apply the methods which would give us self-determination in our communities. The deliberate policy of co-opting a large percentage of black intellectuals on the part of the government and corporations of the United States has stifled our movement to freedom and dignity. Consequently, our history has neither been accurately articulated nor interpreted, particularly with respect to a framework of values. History is a chronological listing of past events and is simultaneously the written precepts of those past events. It is a listening and perception all too often conditioned by prejudice, myth, and or lack of vision. History as it is selected and perceived, therefore, is highly inaccurate in its portrayal of our experience in America. It is not difficult to understand then why there is acquiescence on the part of African people in the face of social, economic injustice, horrendous poverty, and duplicity of federal and state governments in America. If therefore we are to see clearly the events of the past and assign to such events their proper weight in the determination of our present circumstances, we must purge from our God-given minds the historical lies which have been fed to and continue to feed them. We must release our minds to seek out in our past the nature and destiny of our present. It is not easy task. It is not an easy task to purge the mind of the conditioning to which it was and is subject. It is no easy task to sever the ties which the mind has to the social apparatus of America, a social apparatus which through brutal force, puppet leaders, and lies has led the masses further and further down the political, economic scale. This social apparatus has sought in the past and seeks in our time consistently to disembowel meaning from our history and to leave it hollow and impotent in the face of modern challenges. How do we begin to recapture this meaning? We must get at an understanding of our history, our past. We must strip such past of the myriad myths covering its true structure. Do we begin with devils and boogeymen or with courage and struggle? We must have the courage to rediscover the African culture from which we were forcibly taken, the courage to see the brutal socio-economic structure of a slave economy which successfully strips us of knowledge of self. Consequently, one must ask, do we seek a knowledge of our past and the facts of our past? Facts as causes and effect. Facts as causes and effects. Then, upon such a basis of factual observation, we must bring to light reasons of our past circumstances. In this article entitled A Survey of Islam and the African Diaspora, Clyde Ahmed Winters stated, the fact remains that Arabic and Islam has been one of the major vehicles of exchange among African people in Africa and in the diaspora. This is supported by the fact that the majority of both the earliest and latest slaves to arrive in America came from what Europe geographers of the 18th and 19th century called Senegambia, Sudan, and the Upper Guinea region of West Africa. Now, 363 years have passed since the first Africans were brought to the unloading docks of North America as slaves for then British colonies. The position of Africans in the Northern Hemisphere then as well as now reflects the same grim fact, a fact that we often overlook out of powerlessness, that the first Africans brought here were prisoners as a consequence of European economic necessity. The wheels of the Industrial Revolution were slowly but surely beginning to turn, and cotton was the principal product of the English economy, the basis of which was labor cheap or slaves. Those first Africans were prisoners of a socio-economical system which by design was purposely incapable of rendering justice and therefore equal opportunity to Africans as well as other poor minorities. They were prisoners more of a system of calculated oppression than of their own failings as human beings, though the latter idea of African inferiority would soon be propagated and eventually become the rationale